The origins of the Benin Kingdom stretch deep into antiquity. Oral traditions and historical records trace its dynastic lineage to the mythical Prince Oranmiyan, a Yoruba royal from Ile-Ife, who was invited to rule Benin and fathered Iweka I, the first Oba in a long and sacred line. However, long before the influence of Oranmiyan, the Edo people of Benin practiced a rich spiritual and political culture governed by the Ogiso dynasty, ancient rulers believed to be ordained by the deities themselves. Benin's cosmology linked its monarchy directly to the divine. The Oba was considered the earthly representative of gods such as Osanobua, the supreme creator, Olokun, the deity of wealth and the sea, and Ogun, the god of war and iron. Rituals, coronations, and diplomacy were infused with this spiritual legitimacy. The Oba's authority was not just political, it was celestial. For centuries, the Benin Empire ruled with reverence and fear. Its reach stretched across what is now southern Nigeria, with a sophisticated political structure, powerful military, and deep spiritual traditions that commanded respect. The Oba of Benin, the empire's divine monarch, was more than a king. He was a spiritual symbol and the center of an expansive network of vassal kingdoms and tribute-paying communities. Among the vassal states under Benin's spiritual and political influence was Akure, a smaller Yoruba kingdom to the north. For generations, Akure had paid homage to Benin, recognizing the Oba's supremacy through rituals, tributes, and diplomatic protocols. One of those rituals was the presentation of the Chalk of Good Tidings, a symbolic item offered by Benin's emissaries to signal continued peace and alliance. But in 1818, everything changed. The reigning monarch of Akure at the time was the Deji, Akure. When Benin sent Chief Osague, one of its highest-ranking emissaries from the Owebo Chancellery of the Royal Palace to Akure bearing the sacred chalk, Akure not only refused the gesture, he had Chief Osague killed. Concurrently, a Benin merchant named Oganto was assaulted in Akure's market, sparking riots that led to the death of several Benin individuals. A similar event at Igbara Odo resulted in the massacre of many Benis and the destruction of their property. Adorned in full Benin regalia, Chief Osague arrived in Akure accompanied by his entourage. His presence, marked by coral bead adornments symbolizing his rank, drew attention not just from the people, but from Akure himself, who reportedly coveted the emissary's coral beads. A dispute was soon sparked between one of Osage's wives and a local tobacco seller, a conflict that Akure is said to have deliberately incited. This altercation escalated into a brawl, during which Chief Osague, in defense of his wife, was slain. Akure then seized Osage's coral regalia and claimed them for himself, a final insult atop the assassination. News of this betrayal reached Benin swiftly and incited the wrath of Oba Osanwende. But why did Akure take such a drastic and fatal step? Some oral traditions suggest that the killing of Chief Osague was driven by a desire to sever Akure's visible ties to Benin and assert full sovereignty. The presence of the emissary, particularly one so highly ranked within the Owebo Chancellery, symbolized ongoing subordination. By killing him, Akure was symbolically and violently declaring independence. It was also an act of defiance intended to rally Akure's elites and warriors around a renewed sense of local pride and self-rule. The Oba, deeply insulted, summoned his war council and declared a punitive expedition. He placed the operation in the hands of some of Benin's most elite military leaders. The campaign was led by 3 senior war commanders, Izomo Arabor, General Ologbosere, and the valiant warrior known as Imiran, each overseeing distinct routes of attack. 2 front commanders, Imadi and Oyoto, also played critical roles in directing the flanking maneuvers. As Benin's armies advanced, they met stiff resistance from Akure's forces, led by Akure himself. Nonetheless, the coordinated assault overwhelmed Akure's defenses. The Benin army split into strategic divisions, attacking not just Akure but surrounding towns such as Ilawe and Igbara Odo. These territories were destabilized and driven northward along with the Iwi towns. The battle for Akure was brutal. Benin's forces launched a relentless assault and successfully breached the city. Deji of Akure was captured, a deliberate act meant to humiliate, not just defeat. He was bound in chains and taken back to Benin, paraded as a trophy of war. Some accounts claim his head was severed and buried beneath the Oba's palace as a symbol of total submission. Others say it was displayed for weeks before being ritually buried, and his son Adesora, later known as Osupa, was taken prisoner to Benin. Numerous other captives were taken, and valuables including cattle, ivory, and coral were seized. A heavy annual tribute was imposed on Akure, consisting of 3 slaves along with ivory and coral tributes to be paid to the Oba. Following the war, Benin installed a new Deji, a puppet ruler loyal to the Oba, and Akure was formally made a vassal state. Its leaders were now required to send regular tributes, attend Benin court rituals, and never again question the authority of the empire. This event reshaped regional politics, reinforcing Benin's dominance and serving as a cautionary tale to other would-be rebels. The war wasn't about territory or conquest, it was about respect. In the political worldview of the Benin Empire, authority was spiritual and moral, not just military. Disobedience wasn't a political disagreement, it was a cosmic imbalance, and it had to be corrected. The symbolism of the war extended even to the ritual objects involved. The chalk of good tidings, traditionally a gesture of peace and continued alliance, was rooted in centuries of sacred diplomacy. It was more than a gift. It was a reaffirmation of spiritual alignment with the Oba. By rejecting it, Arakale wasn't just dismissing Benin's authority, he was violating a centuries-old tradition that governed peaceful coexistence among kingdoms. Moreover, the Awebo Chancellery from which Chief Osague was dispatched held a unique position within the Benin court. Responsible for palace protocol and the transmission of sacred symbols, it represented the institutional memory of the kingdom. For the emissary of such a body to be murdered was a challenge to Benin's cultural fabric. Even the choice to capture Arakale alive was deliberate. In traditional Benin warfare, live captives, especially high-ranking ones, were used to communicate a message. The parading of Arakale served a dual function. It reasserted Benin's dominance and humiliated a rival who had dared to defy the divine structure of power. It was a calculated use of spectacle to reinforce hierarchy. The aftermath of the war also included significant social and religious restructuring. Akure's traditional rites had to be realigned to acknowledge the Oba's supremacy. Royal rituals began incorporating references to the Benin court. Even the architectural designs of Akure's palaces and shrines saw influence from Benin styles in the decades that followed. These were subtle but powerful forms of cultural integration and control. In addition to the political subjugation, Akure's oral histories and artistic traditions were also impacted. The defeat influenced how stories were passed down, often emphasizing humility and caution in political ambition. Carvings, masks, and ceremonial attire from the post-war period began to incorporate Benin-inspired motifs, serving as a reminder of the cultural and psychological dominance Benin held over its vassals. This war also revealed the limitations of inter-ethnic diplomacy. Despite shared cultural elements, the ideological divide between the Edo-speaking Benin and the Yoruba-speaking Akure widened as a result of the war. The forced cultural assimilation initiated by Benin sowed seeds of resistance that would resurface in different forms over the following generations. While the puppet rulers maintained outward loyalty, internal sentiments within Akure remained cautious, if not resentful. Even centuries later, the story of the Benin-Akure War remains etched in local memory. Traditional festivals, oral poems, and palace rituals in both cities still recall the war. It is remembered not just as a military conflict, but as a moment when pride met power and lost. This war also reflects the complex nature of African pre-colonial diplomacy. Contrary to colonial narratives that depicted African societies as lawless or anarchic, the events of 1818 show a continent governed by systems of etiquette, spiritual laws, and inter-kingdom politics. Killing a diplomat was not simply a crime, it was a disruption of divine order. The punishment had to be equally symbolic. Modern historians studying this period also point to the Benin-Akure War as a study in statecraft. The Oba of Benin knew that war would not only punish Akure, but send a message across the region. His strategy wasn't just military, it was psychological. By capturing and executing the Deji, he turned an act of rebellion into a public lesson. The installation of a puppet ruler ensured long-term control, and the continuation of tribute solidified Benin's influence for decades after. In Akure, the legacy of Arakale is more complicated. Some see him as a defiant leader who tried to assert Yoruba independence in the face of Edo dominance. Others view him as a tragic figure whose miscalculation cost his people their autonomy. What is clear is that his reign ended in fire, chains, and silence. As for Benin, the war reaffirmed its place as a cultural and political powerhouse. Its military prowess, spiritual authority, and administrative complexity allowed it to govern a vast network of territories through fear, diplomacy, and tradition. But it also hinted at the limits of imperial control. Less than a century later, Benin itself would fall to the British in 1897, ironically, after its own emissary was seized. In the end, the Benin-Akure War of 1818 was not just a clash of swords, it was a clash of ideologies, between obedience and defiance, between tradition and ambition, between empires and emerging identities. And like all wars fought over pride, the cost was blood.